In a move that stunned even his closest advisors, King Charles made the most unexpected decision of his reign. Not to rule, but to redefine the crown itself. Behind Buckingham Palace's gilded doors, the world's oldest monarchy shifted in silence. Queen Camilla, once crowned beside him, was quietly stripped of her title, and Prince William was handed the throne. No cameras, no ceremony, just one whisper: "It is time." But what truly drove Charles to step back? Love, duty, or something far more human? Tonight we go behind the palace curtains to uncover the story that reshaped royal history forever. A moment of heartbreak, grace, and rebirth within the House of Windsor. Before we step into this royal turning point, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with others who follow the British monarchy's most emotional moments. Your support helps us bring you more powerful, cinematic storytelling from the world's most guarded family. Now let's uncover how one decision by King Charles changed the crown forever. The grand halls of Buckingham Palace have witnessed centuries of ceremony, coronations, jubilees, and royal declarations, but nothing like this. There were no trumpets that morning. No royal guards lined the marble corridors. Instead, the palace air hung still, so still that even the ticking of the antique clock seemed to echo through the throne room. King Charles entered quietly. No crown, no robe, no entourage, just the steady steps of a man who knew the weight of history resting on his shoulders. He paused beneath the golden chandeliers, and for a long moment he said nothing. This was not abdication by scandal. It was something deeper and far more human. Behind him, Queen Camilla stood at a distance, dignified, calm, but with eyes that revealed everything her lips could not. She had stood beside him through storms of criticism, through decades of scrutiny. And now, in the stillness of that chamber, she stood beside him again, though this time it was to say goodbye. The few senior aides allowed in the room exchanged uncertain glances. They knew what was about to happen, and yet no one dared speak. Charles turned to the pedestal where the crown rested, the same diadem that had once symbolized divine right and unshakable authority. But today, it looked heavier than ever. He looked at it not with pride, but peace. "William," he said softly, his voice calm but resolute. From the far end of the hall, Prince William stepped forward. He didn't wear the royal regalia of ceremony, just a dark suit, simple, modern, human. The echo of his footsteps filled the chamber like the slow beating of a heart. For years, William had been the prince-in-waiting, a symbol of continuity, never of power. Yet in that moment, as he met his father's gaze, something shifted. The boy who once watched his parents' lives unravel in public had become the man to carry the crown as burden forward. Charles took one small step closer. There was no speech prepared, no cameras rolling, only a father and a son. And then, with deliberate calm, Charles placed his hand on the crown and lifted it. The gesture was silent, but it was thunderous in meaning.
He turned to William and said the words that no monarch had spoken so quietly in modern history. "My duty is done. Yours begins." A gasp escaped one of the attendants. Camilla lowered her gaze, tears glinting like glass beneath the chandelier's light. William hesitated. His eyes darted from the crown to his father's face. He didn't reach for it out of ambition, but out of duty. And when his hands finally touched the crown, the weight of it wasn't just metal and jewels. It was lineage, sacrifice, and expectation. He didn't place it on his head. Not yet. Instead, he bowed his head, a gesture that said, "Thank you. I understand. I will carry it forward." For the first time in years, Charles smiled, not as a king, but as a father. It was small, fleeting, but sincere. In the quiet, Camilla stepped forward. For a heartbeat, it seemed she might protest. But instead, she stopped beside Charles and whispered something only he could hear. Those who stood nearby said her voice trembled just once, but her words were steady. "It's time." And with that, she stepped back, removing the faint glimmering brooch that marked her as queen consort. It was over. There was no applause, no anthem, just silence. The kind of silence that history itself seems to respect. Outside, London went on as usual. Taxis honking, crowds bustling, news anchors unaware that the British monarchy had just changed forever. Inside, a new story began. Charles didn't leave the throne room immediately. He lingered, as though listening to the ghosts of those who came before. His mother, his grandfather, the long lineage of rulers who had carried the same crown. He knew this wasn't retreat. It was evolution. The monarchy had to change, or it would fade. As he walked past William, he touched his son's shoulder, firm, reassuring. "Lead with heart," he said quietly. And then he was gone. Camilla watched him leave, her expression unreadable. Pride? Sorrow? Perhaps both. She had spent decades fighting for her place beside him, and in a single morning, that place vanished like mist in the sun. In the hours that followed, word spread within palace walls. A quiet ripple at first, then a tidal wave of whispers. Charles had not abdicated in scandal. He had orchestrated a royal reset. Later that evening, aides delivered sealed envelopes to senior officials. Inside, one line confirmed what the rumors had already suggested. Her Majesty Camilla shall henceforth be styled as Queen Consort Emerita. It was official, elegant, respectful, but absolute. Charles, as private secretary, long loyal to him, described that moment best. It felt like the end of an era, but not the end of a family. And that's exactly what Charles had intended. He had given up power not because he was forced to, but because he believed the monarchy needed to breathe again, to feel human again. For William, the weight of history was now his to bear. He stood alone in the throne room long after the others had left. The echoes of his father's words still lingered. Lead with heart. He looked down at the crown once more, and for a moment he didn't see gold or jewels. He saw his mother's memory. He saw his father's sacrifice. He saw the faces of the people who looked to him for hope in uncertain times. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply nodded to himself, as if making a silent promise. That night, Buckingham Palace glowed softly in the London dusk. No fanfare, no fireworks. Just one story unfolding quietly behind its ancient walls. A king stepping back, a son stepping forward, and a monarchy beginning again. For Camilla, the silence after that morning's ceremony was louder than any public scandal she had ever endured. The corridors that once echoed her footsteps were suddenly empty. Her name, once printed proudly at the top of royal agendas, was quietly removed. No announcement, no farewell statement, just erasure. She had waited a lifetime to be accepted, and in one graceful decision, she was asked to let it all go. But the remarkable thing is, she didn't resist. There were no angry letters, no late-night meetings, no whispers of revenge. Instead, Camilla chose something few expected from a royal used to scrutiny, dignity in departure. That afternoon, she returned to her private quarters, where her staff, many of whom had been with her since her early days, stood waiting for instruction. But there were none. She thanked each one, personally. Some wept, others bowed in silence. And then, she said softly, "It was an honor, truly, but it's time." Those words echoed through the halls like a quiet farewell to an entire chapter of British history. Outside, the press didn't yet know. The palace gates were calm, unaware that Britain's queen had just become its quietest exile. Hours later, the official statement appeared on the royal family's website, a single paragraph confirming her new title, Queen Consort Emerita. It was brief, ceremonial, but final. The title itself carried no power, no duties, no obligations. It was a soft goodbye wrapped in politeness. To the public, it sounded respectful. To Camilla, it meant she no longer existed within the story she had fought to be part of. And yet, she didn't vanish bitterly. Witnesses said she spent that evening writing letters, not of protest, but of gratitude. Letters to charities she had championed, to the staff she'd led, to the institutions that once bore her crest. One aide recalled that she wrote with perfect calm, pausing only once to wipe a single tear. It's strange, isn't it? How someone so controversial, so polarizing in her rise to the throne, could leave in such peace. But perhaps that was a lesson she wanted the world to see. Behind closed doors, Charles met with her privately one last time. No photographers, no fanfare, just two people who had weathered the world's judgment together. He told her, with the same calm he'd shown that morning, "You stood by me when few would. I will never forget that." She nodded, eyes glistening, and replied quietly, "You gave me my place. Now give him his." For the first time, the man who had always looked burdened by duty allowed himself to cry, not out of regret, but relief. It was said that when Charles turned away, Camilla lingered just a moment longer, her hand brushing the chair she once occupied beside him. Then she walked out, not a queen leaving her post, but a woman reclaiming her peace. And yet, beyond the palace walls, the world reacted with a storm of emotion. Social media exploded. Some called it justice, the end of a chapter that had begun with scandal and ended with quiet consequence. Others saw it as tragedy, the silencing of a woman who had endured decades of public vitriol only to fade into history's margins. But inside the royal circle, her departure was met with something else, respect. Senior courtiers describe her as gracious to the last. Even Catherine, now poised to step into a more visible role, was said to have personally ensured Camilla's comfort in those final moments of transition. At a private dinner days later, witnesses recalled a tender scene that few would ever have imagined. Catherine, elegant, calm, walked beside Camilla, guiding her to her seat. No cameras, no performance, just a quiet act of empathy. That single gesture captured what the monarchy had so often forgotten. Compassion is power too. Camilla, once the woman who fractured royal hearts, had become, in her final act, the one who helped heal them. Still, behind her calm, there was heartbreak. When she returned to Clarence's house for the last time, much of it had already been cleared. Her personal monogram had been replaced with a House of Wales crest. The staff who once filled her office were reassigned. Even the framed photograph of her and Charles at their coronation had been taken down. And yet, she didn't protest. She stood in the doorway, smiled faintly, and said to her remaining aide, "Let them remember the good we did." Then she stepped into the waiting car, bound for a quieter life outside London. Observers noted something poetic about her departure. The woman once blamed for royal turmoil now became the symbol of royal transition. As a nation debated her legacy, a story circulated quietly among palace insiders. It happened in a narrow hallway, after the ceremony, long after the cameras were gone. Prince William approached Camilla, alone, without protocol or entourage. They had never been especially close. Their relationship, shaped by years of tension and misunderstanding, had always been polite but distant. But that day was different. He stopped her, extended a hand, and said softly, "Thank you for standing by him." Witnesses described the moment as healing. Camilla smiled faintly, nodded, and replied with words that seemed to carry generations of meaning. "Take care of them." She meant Charles. She meant the family. She meant the crown. It was perhaps the most human moment between them. Two people bound by history, forgiveness, and the quiet acceptance that life had come full circle. After that, she left. No curtain call. No interviews. No scandals. Just stillness. Her reign had ended not in disgrace, but in grace. And as a car disappeared beyond the palace gates, the British monarchy, once defined by division, felt something it hadn't in decades: calm. In the days that followed, Charles withdrew from public life. His schedule cleared, his seal retired. He became, simply, the advisor emeritus. Camilla became a private citizen again. No crown, no guards, no duties. But perhaps that's exactly what she wanted in the end. Freedom. She had fought for love and won it, worn a crown and surrendered it, and in doing so, left behind something far more powerful than titles, a sense of closure. History might remember her controversies, but those who saw a final day will remember something else entirely. A queen who knew when to bow, and a woman who left with her head held high. The morning after the crown changed hands, London woke to a quieter monarchy, one that looked less like a dynasty and more like a family. There were no royal processions, no balcony appearances, just a soft, deliberate calm that felt different. For the first time in centuries, Britain's new monarch did not begin his reign with trumpets or coronation parade. Instead, King William appeared before the nation in a simple navy suit, standing in front of a single flag in a modest podium. No gold, no grandeur, only purpose. He took a breath and began. "I honor my father for the grace of letting go, and my mother for the lesson she left us all." There it was, the moment the world realized this would be a reign of humility, not hierarchy. William didn't speak like a ruler. He spoke like a man, a husband, a son, a father. He talked about unity, service, and love, not as abstract virtues, but as guiding principles. His voice carried the steadiness of someone who understood that power means nothing without empathy. Behind the cameras, Catherine watched silently, her hands clasped before her. For years, she had been the quiet constant, graceful, steady, never overreaching. But now, as she stood on the brink of a new era, her calmness felt like command. That night, as William's speech echoed across television screens and phones around the world, something remarkable happened. People didn't argue about the monarchy's relevance. They felt its humanity. News anchors described it as a royal reset. Social media called it the reign of heart. And in living rooms across Britain, ordinary citizens, many of whom had long grown disillusioned with royal tradition, found themselves nodding. For the first time, the crown felt close again. Meanwhile, behind the palace walls, a quiet transformation was underway. The royal household was restructured within 24 hours. Camilla's office was dismantled, her charities reassigned. Clarence's house was reproposed, its crest replaced with the insignia of the House of Wales. Even the palace's communication teams began rebranding overnight. Less formality, more sincerity. Royal aide described the shift as light breaking through heavy curtains. And at the heart of that light stood Catherine. She had never sought the spotlight, but the world had always been drawn to her. And now, as queen, she embodied the compassion and balance that modern royalty needed. At her first public appearance after the transition, a quiet charity dinner, she made no speeches. She simply walked among the guests, listened to their stories, and smiled. But there was one moment that captured hearts worldwide. When Camilla entered the room, no longer wearing her crown, Catherine rose and gently guided her to her seat. No words, no theatrics, just grace. It was a gesture that said more than any royal decree could. Respect endures. That image traveled faster than any press release. Within hours, it had gone viral. A queen helping another queen, symbolizing not rivalry, but reconciliation. It was a perfect representation of what William and Catherine's monarchy would stand for, a bridge between old and new, tradition and tenderness. As weeks turned to months, Britain began to adjust to its new rhythm. Royal ceremonies became simpler, charities became more visible, and the tone of the palace changed from authority to authenticity. Even international press, one skeptical, began to describe William as the people's king and Catherine as the monarchy's heart. And somewhere, far from the noise of cameras and headlines, Charles watched it all unfold with quiet pride. He had not vanished into bitterness or regret. He had become what he always wanted to be, a father who had done his duty. In one of his rare public remarks since stepping back, he said softly, "The crown belongs to the future, and the future belongs to them." It wasn't abdication. It was evolution. And as the monarchy evolved, something deeper changed too, the way people saw it. No longer a symbol of distance, but of devotion, no longer a relic, but a reminder that leadership, at its best, is an act of love. On the first anniversary of his reign, William visited his father's private residence. No press was allowed, but witnesses later described a scene that felt almost biblical in its simplicity. Father and son walking side by side through the garden. No titles, no thrones, just two men bound by purpose. Charles paused beside a rose bush, one that had been planted decades earlier by his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and smiled. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said. William smiled back. "So would yours." That was it. No ceremony, no proclamation, just a moment of legacy passing quietly through generations. And perhaps that's what made it all so powerful. In a world obsessed with spectacle, the British monarchy had rediscovered something it had lost long ago: silence with meaning. The story that began with heartbreak had ended with harmony. Camilla found peace, Charles found rest, and William and Catherine found purpose. The monarchy was reborn, not through power, but through humanity. Because sometimes the greatest act of leadership don't happen on thrones. They happen in the moments when someone chooses to let go. And so, the story of King Charles' shocking decision isn't one of loss. It's one of love. A love strong enough to step aside. A love humble enough to let the next generation lead. Camilla's quiet grace, William's steady heart, Catherine's compassion. Together, they've written a new chapter for Britain's royal family. One where empathy matters as much as tradition, and where duty finally meets humanity. Maybe that's a real legacy Charles leaves behind. Not a crown polished with jewels, but a lesson polished with wisdom. That true kingship isn't about ruling the world, it's about serving it. If you felt moved by this royal story, give this video a like, share it with someone who loves these human moments behind the crown, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional storytelling, where history meets heart. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and remember, even the world's oldest traditions can still find new beginnings. Crown sparkles.